There is a silent suffering that many endure, often in the name of love. They hold on to relationships that make them feel small, insignificant, or invisible. They chase affection that is not freely given, hoping that if they give more, love will finally bloom. They convince themselves that patience is a virtue, that devotion will one day be rewarded, that the love they seek is just beyond the next sacrifice. But in doing so, they lose themselves, piece by piece, in a love that was never truly theirs to begin with. Yet, the deeper truth is this: real love does not create suffering. It does not leave you questioning where you stand. It does not make you feel unworthy. It does not drain the very life out of you. Love, when it is true, is steady, nourishing, and clear. The illusion of love. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment, especially to illusions, and one of the most painful illusions we can have is believing that someone loves us, when in reality, they do not. But how do we know when love is absent? The heart, clouded by desire and hope, often deceives itself. It clings to a vision of love, mistaking temporary affection for something permanent, mistaking attention for devotion, mistaking inconsistency for passion. However, an awakened mind sees clearly. It recognizes the subtle but undeniable signs that love is missing. If someone does not truly love you, they will make you feel three things. 1. Uncertainty. You will always wonder where you stand. 2. Unworthiness. You will feel that you must constantly prove yourself. 3. Emotional exhaustion. You will give endlessly, but never feel replenished. These are not signs of love. They are warnings, warnings that the path you are on leads only to suffering, warnings that it is time to awaken and let go. The journey to wisdom. Let me share with you the story of a traveler, a man who, like many of us, sought love in all the wrong places, a man who chased after the mirage of affection, only to find himself lost in the desert of longing. But in his search, he discovered something far more valuable than fleeting love. He found wisdom. And through his journey, perhaps you, too, will find the courage to see love for what it truly is. Let us begin. The traveler's search for love, the mirage of affection. Once upon a time, a traveler roamed the vast and winding roads of the world, searching for something he could not name. He had seen many lands, crossed endless rivers, and walked under countless stars. But still, the emptiness in his heart remained. A longing tugged at his soul, a deep, unspoken desire to be seen, to be cherished, to be loved. He had encountered many people on his journey, but none had ever stayed. Some had greeted him with kindness, others with indifference, but no one had made him feel as if he truly belonged. One day, in a quiet village nestled between rolling green hills, he met someone whose presence felt like the warmth of the morning sun. Their smile made him feel important. Their words carried a sweetness that wrapped around his heart. For the first time, he felt as if he had found what he had been seeking for so long. Whenever he was with this person, he felt alive. He listened to their laughter, cherished their presence, and held on to every fleeting moment as if it were a precious jewel. He thought, perhaps this is love. Perhaps this is the connection my soul has been searching for. A love that feels uncertain. But as the days turned into weeks, a strange shadow began to creep into his heart. Something felt off, unsteady, uncertain. Sometimes, this person would greet him warmly, speak to him with affection, and make him feel as though he truly mattered. Other times, they were distant, distracted, and cold. The traveler could not understand this shift. He questioned his worth in their life. Did I do something wrong? He wondered. Why do they change like the wind? He tried harder, offering more of himself, his time, his energy, his devotion, yet, it never seemed to be enough. He would wait for their affection, but it came in fragments, unpredictable and fleeting. He convinced himself that if he just proved his worth, if he just loved harder, things would change. But instead of feeling fulfilled, he felt drained. Instead of feeling cherished, he felt exhausted. Instead of love bringing him peace, it left him in turmoil. Was this truly love? Seeking the wisdom of the sage. Confused and weary, the traveler finally decided to seek guidance. He had heard of a wise old sage who lived in solitude atop a distant mountain. They said he possessed great wisdom, the kind that could illuminate even the most tangled hearts. Determined to find clarity, the traveler embarked on yet another journey, not for love, but for understanding. When he arrived, he found the sage sitting in quiet meditation, the golden rays of the setting sun casting long shadows around him. The traveler bowed respectfully and poured out his heart. He spoke of the person he had met. He described the warmth, the connection, the moments of joy, and then he spoke of the doubt, the exhaustion, the longing that never seemed to be met. The sage listened with gentle patience, his face calm, his eyes filled with knowing. After a moment of silence, the sage smiled and spoke. There are 3 signs that love is absent. If you see these signs, do not chase the mirage. No matter how much you thirst, an illusion will never quench you. The traveler felt his breath catch. Had he been chasing a mirage all along? He leaned in, eager to hear the truths that could finally set his heart free. The 3 signs of love's absence. 1. Uncertainty, the doubt of love. The sage took a small stone from the ground and dropped it into the still pond before them. The water, once serene, rippled outward, distorting the reflection of the sky above. The traveler watched in silence as the ripples expanded, each one carrying the disturbance further and further across the surface. When love is true, the sage spoke, his voice calm. It is like still water, calm, steady, and reassuring. But when love is absent, it is like this disturbed pond, full of ripples, full of doubt. The traveler stared at the pond, feeling something shift inside him. He had spent so many nights lying awake, questioning the love he believed he had. How many times had his heart felt like this pond? How many times had he waited for certainty, only to be met with more doubt? He had often asked himself, do they truly care for me? Do I matter to them as much as they matter to me? But instead of receiving clear answers, he was met with contradictions. There were moments of warmth, smiles that felt like sunlight, words that sounded like love, and yet, there were also moments of cold distance, of silence that stretched too long, of messages left unanswered. It was like chasing the wind, just when he thought he had grasped it. It slipped away. The sage studied the traveler's face and then continued. Doubt is not the enemy of love. But when love is true, doubt does not linger, it dissolves in the warmth of sincerity. The nature of true love. The traveler let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had always believed that love required patience, that uncertainty was simply part of the journey, that waiting for clarity was normal. But was it? Real love, as the sage described, did not make a person question where they stood. It did not leave them wondering if they were enough. It did not make them feel like a stranger in their own relationship. The traveler thought back to the countless times he had been left waiting for a reply, waiting for a sign, waiting for a moment of undivided attention that never truly lasted. And yet, despite all the uncertainty, he had stayed. Had he mistaken his own endurance for love? The sage watched him, then gently asked, "Have you ever watched the sunrise?" The traveler nodded. "Did you ever doubt that it would appear?" The traveler shook his head. "That is what real love feels like," the sage said. "It is certain, unwavering, dependable. If you must constantly ask where you stand, then you are standing in the wrong place." The weight of realization. The traveler lowered his gaze. For the first time, he saw the truth. He had been chasing something that was never truly his. Love was not meant to be a puzzle, a riddle, or a guessing game. Love was meant to be known, to be felt, to be trusted. Yet here he was, still searching for reassurance, still trying to decode a love that should have been clear from the start. He thought of all the excuses he had made, all the justifications he had whispered to himself. Maybe they just need time. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe love is supposed to be uncertain. But love is not supposed to be uncertain. Love does not make a person feel as though they must prove themselves, chase after clarity, or endure confusion. The traveler finally understood. If love is real, it does not need to be chased. If love is real, it is as certain as the rising sun. For the first time, he wondered, had he been holding on to uncertainty, mistaking it for love? And more importantly, was he ready to let go? 2. Unworthiness, the shrinking heart. The sage bent down and scooped a handful of sand into his palm. He held it up to the traveler, letting the grains slip through his fingers, cascading down like a quiet waterfall of dust. A person who does not love you will make you feel like this sand, the sage said. Insignificant, slipping away, never enough. The traveler watched the sand fall, his heart sinking with it. He had known this feeling far too well. The feeling of trying, giving, proving, only to be left questioning his worth. The feeling of standing before someone he loved, offering them his time, his energy, his devotion, yet never truly being seen, never truly being chosen. Hadn't he spent so much time trying to be good enough? Hadn't he bent himself in ways that felt unnatural, just to fit into their world? He thought back to the way he had measured his words, the way he had softened his needs, the way he had given more than he had, just to receive a fraction in return. And yet, no matter how much effort he made, it never seemed to be enough. The weight of proving oneself. The sage looked into the traveler's weary eyes and spoke again. A flower does not beg the sun to shine upon it, and yet, when the sun loves the flower, it does so freely. The words settled deep into the traveler's chest. For so long, he had convinced himself that love must be earned. That if he could just be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, perhaps they would finally see his worth. But the truth was painful. Love that must be fought for is not love, it is survival. Love should not make a person feel small, unseen, or easily replaceable. And yet, he had been shrinking himself for so long. He had quieted his own needs. He had accepted whatever little affection was given, believing that something was better than nothing. But love should never feel like scraps thrown at your feet. The sage sighed, picking up another handful of sand and this time, clenching his fist tightly. When you try to hold on to someone who does not truly cherish you, this is what happens. The traveler watched as the sand forced its way through the sage's closed fingers, escaping despite his grip. No matter how much you cling, no matter how much you give, you cannot make someone love you the way you deserve. The traveler swallowed hard. How many times had he held on, hoping things would change? How many times had he told himself that if he just tried harder, maybe one day they would truly see him? And yet, he had been seen, and still, he was not chosen. The shadow in someone else's world. The traveler closed his eyes, remembering all the times he had felt like a shadow, always there, always present, but never truly noticed. He had been the one waiting, the one compromising, the one willing to bear the weight of the relationship alone. And yet, what had he gained? The realization cut deep. Love, when it is real, does not require a person to shrink, to prove, or to fight for their place. It is given freely, effortlessly, like the sun shining upon the flower. The traveler took a slow breath. For so long, he had feared that if he let go, he would have nothing. But now, for the first time, he realized. By holding on to someone who never truly cherished him, he had already lost himself. And no love, no matter how intoxicating, no matter how familiar, was worth that. The sage placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You are not small," he said. "You only feel small because you have been standing next to someone who refuses to see your true size." The traveler finally understood. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to stop standing there. 3. Emotional exhaustion, the draining love. The sage took a candle and held it in his hands. Its flame flickered, casting a soft, golden glow between them, illuminating the quiet space around them. "Love, when it is real, is like a flame," the sage said. "It gives warmth without burning. But when love is absent, it is like fire that consumes, leaving only exhaustion in its wake." The traveler gazed at the flickering flame, mesmerized by the way it danced, vulnerable to the slightest movement of air. A memory stirred within him, all the times he had felt drained, depleted, running on empty. How many times had he been the one keeping the relationship alive? How many times had he been the one initiating conversations, making plans, reaching out, giving freely? And yet, it never felt like enough. He had convinced himself that love required work, that effort was proof of devotion. But was it truly love, when he was the only one making an effort? The sage's voice was steady. "Love is like breath. It should flow naturally. If you feel exhausted, if every interaction feels like an effort, then you are not receiving love. You are chasing it." The traveler's heart clenched. How many times had he felt tired, empty, depleted? How many times had he convinced himself that his exhaustion was normal, that love meant enduring, that love meant sacrifice, that love meant trying harder? But deep down, he had known the truth. A love that nourishes should not feel like a weight that suffocates. The heavy burden of one-sided love. The sage tilted the candle slightly, letting a small drop of wax fall onto the ground. A relationship should be like this flame, offering warmth without demanding sacrifice. But when you are the only one keeping the fire alive, you will eventually burn out. The traveler thought of the times he had been the one holding things together. The one who always reached out first. The one who adjusted his needs to accommodate the other. The one who reassured, who waited, who gave without receiving. And the worst part? He had accepted exhaustion as proof of love. He had mistaken his willingness to endure as a sign of devotion, believing that if he just gave more, one day it would be enough. But love should not feel like labor. Love should fill you, not drain you, the sage continued. It should feel like rest, not struggle. If every moment with someone feels like a battle, if you are always left tired, then what you are holding onto is not love, but attachment. A heavy silence filled the air. The only sound was the soft flickering of the candle's flame. The traveler let out a slow breath. He had mistaken effort for love. He had poured himself into an empty vessel, hoping it would one day overflow. He had been burning himself out, trying to keep the wrong fire alive. The truth of letting go. The sage gently blew out the candle. The traveler flinched at the sudden darkness. The absence of light was startling, so immediate, so absolute. "Do you see?" the sage asked, his voice calm. "Love that is real will continue to shine, even in the darkest of times. But love that must be forced, love that is one-sided, will always burn out." The traveler swallowed hard. Had he been holding onto a fire that was never meant to last? Had he been clinging to ashes, thinking he could bring them back to life. In that moment, he finally understood. Love should nourish, not deplete. Love should feel like breathing, not gasping for air. Love should feel like rest, not exhaustion. Love should bring peace, not suffering. The traveler had spent so long chasing something that only drained him. But now, he realized, he had the power to walk away. And for the first time in a long time, he felt light. The traveler's awakening. The traveler sat in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of realization. The sage's words echoed in his mind, each one peeling away the illusions he had clung to for so long. He had spent so much energy trying to hold on to someone who never truly held on to him. He had lived in uncertainty, always questioning where he stood. He had measured his worth against someone's fleeting attention. He had mistaken effort for love, endurance for devotion, persistence for meaning. But love should not be like this. He had confused moments of kindness for commitment. He had mistaken temporary affection for something lasting. He had been living in the hope that one day, things would change. But now, he understood. The sage placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a touch filled with warmth and understanding. "Let go of what does not love you," the sage said. "Not with anger, nor with sorrow, but with wisdom. Seek the well that truly holds water. Love should not be a struggle, it should be a sanctuary." The traveler took a deep breath. For the first time, he did not resist these words. He did not feel the need to justify his pain, to hold on to the past, to keep waiting for something that had already shown him its truth. He simply let go. It was not an act of bitterness. It was not an act of resentment. It was an act of clarity. With a newfound lightness in his chest, the traveler stood. The mountain air felt different, crisper, clearer, freer. He bowed deeply to the sage, gratitude filling his heart. And then, without hesitation, he turned and began his descent down the mountain. Not to return to the one who had made him feel uncertain, unworthy, and exhausted. Not to chase after love that needed to be earned, but to walk toward something greater. A love that did not have to be begged for. A love that was steady, clear, and nourishing. And most importantly, the peace within himself. For in the act of letting go, he had not lost anything. He had found himself. Many people find themselves trapped in relationships that slowly erode their sense of self. They stay, not because they are truly happy, but because they cling to hope that one day, things will change, that love will finally feel certain, that they will finally feel seen. But true wisdom is not in waiting for love to grow where it does not exist. It is in recognizing the signs, the uncertainty, the unworthiness, the exhaustion, and understanding that love should never feel like a constant battle for validation. If someone makes you feel uncertain, love is absent. If someone makes you feel unworthy, love is absent. If someone makes you feel exhausted, love is absent. Love is not a puzzle to be solved. It is not a prize to be earned. Real love is given freely, like the sun shining on a flower, like water flowing effortlessly in a river. So why hold on to what drains you? Why fight for a place in someone's heart when love, in its truest form, would never require you to beg? There is great courage in letting go. There is great freedom in choosing yourself. Like the traveler, you, too, have the power to walk away, not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. For when you release what does not nourish you, you open yourself to something greater. A love that is steady, a love that is true, a love that, at last, feels like home. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to my channel for more wisdom on love, mindfulness, and finding inner peace. Have you ever held onto a love that left you uncertain, unworthy, or exhausted? How did you find the strength to let go? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Remember, love does not create suffering, attachment does. Let go of what dims your light. Choose clarity, choose peace, choose yourself. And when you do, you won't just find love, you will find freedom.